now Startup Central, India's first and only daily show dedicated to startups and entrepreneurship. I'm Chandra Shrikant, joining you from India's startup capital, Bengaluru, and we have a special episode today. I'm calling it special because of my co-anchor and guest on the show today, Sree Sreenivasan. He's the Chief Digital Officer of New York City, not a company, not a corporation, but an entire city. And before that, he was Chief Digital Officer of the Metropolitan Museum of Art and Columbia. But today, Sree, you're going to play a very different role. This is not going to be a typical interview. What we've really done is curated questions from 6 to 7 startups, a couple of investors, and an enabler in the startup ecosystem to really see how they can leverage digital. I mean, the best learnings really happen at the intersection of sectors, and I guess digital is something that all of us are learning every day, and who better to tell us than Sree Sreenivasan. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Well, thank you for having me. This is so exciting that you have a daily show about this. We don't have this in America, and I'm so glad to be here with you. And I'm only in Bangalore for 20 hours, but I've already learned so much, and the energy and excitement here is very different from what you see in many parts of the world, but you can feel it here, and in the air. The startup scene is fantastic.
Great. I'm going to kick it off right away with questions that we've got. I mean, it's not in particular any order. So I'm just going to start off with InMobi, a mobile advertising network co-founded by 4 people. And this is a question from their CEO and co-founder Naveen Tiwari. He's actually sent 2 interesting questions. The first of which is, how do you think a B2B company can leverage social media differently?
This is a question I get a lot because most of the noise around social media is about B2C and how consumers are using stuff. I think in one level it's very easy to say it's much better in the B2C space and B2B is much more difficult. But I think there's an increasing awareness that the most successful B2B plays are about human to human. Even the B to B, the second B is also a business, but is also a person. Right. And there are people there who run those companies. And so what you need to do if you're a B2B company is to not just think about how are you reaching organization to organization, but how are you reaching people to people within the 2 organizations. And that means really working on the social media presence of what you're doing. And in many cases, we found that people follow businesses, but people engage with people. And therefore, if you're a big institution or a small institution, think about ways in which you can bring alive what you do. Right. And tools that we have now, all these live streaming tools and behind the scenes work are very popular and a way of getting people excited about technology. You look at people like Elon Musk. In many cases, he's selling cars, the Tesla car he's selling, but he's also doing things to get rockets into space. And there he's not selling to an individual, he's selling to a business. And if you are someone who's selling a business, selling a product, an idea or service, social media can have an enormous impact, and that's what we're seeing.
Right. The second question, also from InMobi, do you think Indian companies are doing well on social media platforms? If not, what do you think, holds startup back from being popular on social media, and what can they do better?
I think a lot of companies of any size can do better on social. And I say this in America, and I say this in the UK. Everywhere I go, I talk about the fact that we're leaving opportunities on the table. We're not optimizing our social. And that even happens among social media companies. And I do a lot of work with startups and getting them to think about social in new ways. And the reason why I don't think all of us are as good as we could be is because we're not focusing on that. We're focusing on other aspects of the work, and I think that's a good thing. Right. You want to work on your company first and worry about the social later, but I think you should have a social media strategy 6 months before you launch, just before you launch, and after you launch. What is a continuous cycle of using social to connect and make a difference within all your stakeholders that you have? So that means working very intentionally on social. One of the things I think about is that if you're good in real life, you can be great on social media. But if you're great in real life, you can be awesome on social media. But if you're bad in real life, you have terrible products, terrible service, then you're going to be awful on social. What social does, it amplifies who you are.
Right.
And if you want to connect and you want to make a difference in social, you must use it with that in mind. And some of the best startups are just bad at social because that's not what they're thinking about. And that's okay. But finding that balance and getting smarter about it is going to be important as well.
Right, right. Certainly hope InMobi and a lot of startups found that interesting. But I'm going to come to the next set of questions, which is from Girish Mathubudhan, the CEO of Freshdesk, also in the B2B space, which is, taking on the Zendesks in the US. So their question is pretty detailed. I'm going to read it out. So he says NYC has 8.5 million people, not to mention daily migratory population of more than 500,000 tourists. As a company that places a lot of emphasis on customer engagement, they'd like to know the kind of emphasis that you are going to place on citizen engagement and how you would start and then scale it up. I guess scaling is a big part of starting up. So they want to know how you're going to do that for a city.
And I have to say that I was the first Chief Digital Officer in 2 previous times, and this time I'm the 3rd Chief Digital Officer in my role. I follow 2 awesome women, Rachel Hout and Jessica Singleton. So it's much easier when you're following in somebody's footsteps, and I'm just taking what they're doing to the next level. And for those of you interested in cities, there's a wonderful mayor's playbook. You just you Google New York City Digital Playbook and kind of roadmap where New York City needs to go. And we're just taking that and working on it. Your questioner asked the right numbers. He had the right numbers. There are 8.5 million citizens of New York City, people who live there. There are 4.5 million who commute into New York City.
Right.
And then there are 55 million people who visit New York City, and then 300,000 people who work for the city government. And my job is to work with all of them and thinking about that scaling effect and how do you do that. And I think what startups need to know is that whatever project you're doing, it has to be a basis of experimentation and seeing, where do you have to pivot, as they say, in what you're doing. The scaling will only come if you get the small numbers right first.
Right.
And it's very easy to get caught up in I'm going to change the world by having so many millions of users. And in every startup that I've been involved with, I have had students who've done enormously successful things. And in every case, they were doing it because they had a passion for it and didn't set out to do it for lots of money. And the thing that I keep saying to entrepreneurs or people who want to start companies is, if you won't do it for no money, you won't be able to do it for all the money in the world. And that same applies to this idea of scaling. Of course, you'll need to show that you can scale. But let's talk about whether you can do it on a small scale and make it work, and does it look good while doing it? Is it flawless in its execution? Right. I taught entrepreneurship for 4 years at Columbia with a gentleman named Ken Lehrer, and people would ask him all the time, how do you decide who to support? He makes a lot of bets in a year. And he said that he looks for a couple of things in the people when he decides where to invest. And the first thing he looks at is the product or service. Does it work?
Right.
Does it just work, and does it work beautifully?
Right.
And so he's not saying, does it work for 1 billion people? He says, does it work? And then, does it have people who are active, engaged users of it?
Right.
And they don't have to be paying customers, but do they actually use it? Is there a need for this thing? And he looks at the team, the founders, who are they, what are they doing? He looks them in the eye and then decides to invest in them or not. And so nowhere along the way has he asked about the money,
Sure.
what's the business model. I mean, he will of course
Right.
ask those things, but that's not the driving factor. And so how do we, as startup folks or people who want to support the ecosystem of startups, how do we do that when the first question you want to ask is, hey, how much money am I going to make? And the difference when I talk to VC people here, and I talk in America and in some other countries, the idea here is that people want almost 100% success rate in the startups that they're supporting. Whereas a really good investor knows that you may make 30 bets in a year and you just have 1 or 2 that succeed, But a lot of our folks here want 100%
Right.
success, and that
Right.
I think is sort of my message to the VC community and investors is be prepared to take some losses,
Okay.
and that's the only way we support the ecosystem.
Right. I'm going to ask you to, really give me shorter
Yes,
answers
that's
because
one
we
of the
have so
problems.
many more
Yes, of
questions
course, of
coming.
course.
So this is from Ravi Gururaj, who you met this morning,
Yes.
Chairman of the NASSCOM Product Council. So he wants you to give top tips for bridging communication across social media channels without turning it into a boring experience. I mean, FB, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, Pinterest, the list just goes on. So, what would your tips be there? Again, very quickly.
Yeah, so I think the tips are that use social media in a way that makes sense for your audience. Look at every post you write in whatever platform from the audience point of view instead of from your own point of view. And when you're posting, think about posting things that are not about you. This is kind of the most surprising thing, that the best successful companies are the ones that show off their domain expertise rather than saying, I'm so awesome, I'm so great. So if you're a startup in a particular area, don't keep saying, my startup is so great. Instead, show your expertise in that topic, and then people connect and follow and know that you're worth it. Because nobody wants to hear someone showing off all day.
Right.
And it gets really boring really fast.
Right. Next question coming from John Samuel Raja, co-founder of How India Lives, which is a data journalism startup. And his question is, what are your top 3 sources of news for India? And what role do you think data companies like How India Lives can play in catering to the US market?
I'm hearing so many new company names. It's great. I need a list of these folks so I can follow them, and I wish them all great success. I think that for me to understand India, I'm using social, I'm using Twitter, following interesting people. And that's also another tip, that if you find Twitter boring, I say it's because you're following boring people, right? Optimize Twitter by following the best people you can, and there's so many great, interesting voices in India that you should be following, you should be working with, you should be talking to. And and there are all these new startups that I see all the time, even in the space of just news, right? So Quint and Scroll, and I met somebody who started a new one called netadata.in. Neta Data, so it's like Politico or 538, which are big brands in America, for the Indian context.
Right.
And I like that people are trying new things, and journalism needs to change. You guys are so lucky. You live in a country where you can get 14 newspapers or maybe more. Just in English you can get those many. I live in a country where you can get 1 English business daily. In Bangalore, I bet you can get 5 English business dailies. But Indian media needs to change. And one of the ways that change is going to happen is because startups are going to drive them to change.
Right.
An example is with Scroll. They have a fantastic newsletter. Every day I get that, I read it. And you should be thinking, what is your newsletter strategy?
Right.
Everybody wants to know, well, what is my Snapchat strategy? But what is your newsletter? In a Snapchat world, email still counts, is one of the things I think about.
Right. Next, again, from Ashwini Ashokan of Matchread, and it's an artificial intelligence startup based in Chennai, where you're heading next. So she says, as a city, NYC is so divided, in its demographic in terms of races, countries, and so on. How will you reconcile so many different interests with the charter that you have?
Yeah, it's my challenge. And the digital divide in New York is very real, as it is in India, as it is in Bangalore, as it is in Mumbai and any other city. And we have to, as folks who work in government, really be aware of that. And whatever we can do to be transparent and clear about the opportunities. So here in India, I was trying to get a SIM card, and you know how complicated. Actually, most people may not know it's so complicated because you already have your SIM card.
Right.
But the new rules around SIM cards are really complicated. And I was cursing as I was living through them. But I wouldn't have minded if I thought that everybody is experiencing the same thing. But we know the terrorists are buying SIM cards by the bucket. They're not worried about these things, right? And that's the frustrating aspect of this. So how do we make sure that whatever the process is, it's easy, it makes sense? Only 30% of Americans above the age of 65 have a smartphone, because they don't see a reason for using a smartphone. So part of it is racial issues, part of it is economic issues, but part of it is also attitude and aptitude. So part of our government work is to show people the value of technology also.
Right. Question that's somewhat related to the previous one. This is from Rehan Yar Khan. He's a venture capitalist with Rise Venture Partners with some very successful early exits. He says he wants you to give us parallels on how New York is really bringing digital to different classes of population, and if there are lessons here for India from that.
I think in India, going through all these different cities, hearing the opportunity, seeing new things that people are doing. There's this Twitter Seva that's happening where you can complain to the railway ministry and then someone responds to you in a few minutes. Or you had someone lose their passport and tweeted at the External Affairs Minister and his wife got her passport. Like, if you tweet right now at John Kerry, I've lost my passport, you're not getting your passport tomorrow. And the reason is that in America, there's a very good process to get your passport, emergency passport you can get. So you don't need John Kerry's help. But in India, because the processes are still changing and it's not a level playing field, it's really good to have the minister's help. So how do we think about that in kind of every step of the way? In anything you do with the government, you do with technology, is something that's a challenge and an opportunity.
Right. And Sanjay Swami from Prime Venture Partners wants to know, if you plan to partner with startups in your role as Chief Digital Officer of New York.
Well, absolutely. Part of my job is to be kind of ambassador to the tech community and to bring startups to New York. And you may remember the movie Social Network, where Mark Zuckerberg and Eduardo Severin have a choice. Do they move their startup from Harvard to New York or to San Francisco, Silicon Valley? And that's now a dozen years ago or so. It made sense for them to go to San Francisco. Now the argument we'd make is come to the greatest city in the world because we are now as tech friendly as we can be, and we want people to come there, and we want to partner. And I want to listen and travel and understand what is the range of issues that people are dealing with, whether it's in Israel or in Korea or in India.
Right.
And as I keep saying, I'm learning so much in just this little short time I've been here.
Yeah, and Arun Natarajan from Venture Intelligence, they do data analysis of investments. Follow-up question to the journalism startup that I said. He wants to know about monetization. How does one really go about that?
By the way, if I had the answers to all of these things, I would be having a startup and making lots of money. I'm terrible at predicting things, and I'm also terrible at giving advice, because advice is easy and free. It's the hard work that the entrepreneurs do. In terms of monetization, it's really important to have a plan, have a strategy, have a pathway to monetization. It doesn't have to be at the beginning. But as I said earlier, it's about having a product that really works, that people really care about, and then people will come and support it if you have a great product. If you have a product that doesn't work, there's no point in worrying about monetization, right? So go back to the basics. What need are you trying to fill? How many people will use this? Does it work? Does it work really well? And is there a path to profitability at some point in what you do? Right. Rather than saying, we want to know now whether it is profitable. So a great, we talked about Huffington Post, Ken Lehrer, who put in about $1 million and got $300 million at the end. He didn't do it because he was trying to get $300 million. He was trying to do it to support Ariana in her venture, and they were doing this together. Right. And they got all the money in the world because they were willing to do it for no money. And that's that same idea. But you definitely need a pathway to making money, even if you're not actually making it at the beginning. Right. Final couple of questions. So the second last one is from Harshal Mathur, CEO of Razorpay, a fintech startup. So he says, with almost all companies leveraging social media and lowering attention spans, isn't there too much of content and clutter? How do we cut through the clutter? No, absolutely. There's too much noise. There's too much stuff happening. It's hard to track all of this stuff. And so we have to be better at improving the noise to signal ratio. And part of it is listening to more interesting people, reducing the clutter in our own lives, and I always wanted to be a millionaire. And I did become a millionaire. It's very exciting. I became a millionaire, but in unread Gmail messages, right? And that's my problem, is I wish it was in rupees, but it's not, or dollars, but it's not. And we have to work on that. And then we should ask ourselves, what are we doing to reduce the clutter in the world? Are we sending out crap, then we're adding to the noise, right? Instead, are there ways in which we can be smarter about the content we share every day? Look at this piece of content. Is it going to help the world or waste the time of the world? And then you will decide how much to share.
The last one's from Rahul Narayan, co-founder of Team Indus, a startup that wants to put a rover on the moon. So very exciting space. So his question is, in today's digital day and age, where do you draw the line between what you stand for and what is perceived as the right thing to say?
Yeah, that's a big problem. We know that Mr. Trump has perfected the art of saying the wrong thing and just going, like, really believing in it.
And look at the number of followers.
Yeah, the number of followers he has, but you're also seeing that he's, whatever trouble the campaign is in, is because of social and digital as well. And you have to be very careful about what you say. And I spend 3 to 6 minutes in every tweet I write, because I want to be very careful.
Not trigger happy.
Yeah, not being trigger happy. I also don't have a real life. I write every tweet I write as my last tweet. In case I get hit by a bus after the tweet, it's going to be on a Tumblr that collects all the last tweets. So really thinking about your brand and what you're saying, and are you being collectively more helpful to the world or just talking about yourself?
Sree, thanks for taking all those questions. I certainly hope the startups found it very interesting. But I have one final question. Don't you get exhausted, you know, at some point? You're on Facebook, you're on Twitter, you're on Snapchat. I mean, and this applies to everyone. After 5 tweets, you know, I feel like I'm done for the day. So, you know, how do you really cope, and where do you get the energy from, or how does one get the energy to do this?
No, it's a problem everybody has. I'm on Snapchat, but I don't use it. I'm Sree, D-O-T-N-E-T, Sree.net, because I don't have enough time. But I have to say that about Facebook, about Twitter, about Instagram. I'm on those, on all of those. So finding the right rhythm and time. You don't have to be on every platform. Be on the platform that makes sense for you and your audience and your stakeholders and who you're connecting to. And then think about ways in which you can create a piece of content, put it in multiple places, instead of doing them all the time.
Great. Thanks so much for talking to ET Now. Great having you on the show. We certainly hope you found all those tips and tricks interesting, and I hope it helps all the startups out there to really leverage digital, to really leverage social media. Thanks so much for watching Startup Central.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/etnow, and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at etnowlive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/etnow.